Good morning and welcome, and thank you for joining me again as we continue our study through the book of Proverbs. We're in chapter 11, picking up the conversation in verse 4. And all last week, we put a little focus on about speech or words or talking. And I said that basically these next 2 weeks, that would be really the focus of everything. And I left off last week talking about integrity, and I said it's integrity in our speech, not just integrity in our actions. And usually those things will come together when we're focused on living a life of integrity, or basically a life that's consistent with the will of God for our lives. And that's what brings me to verse 4 today, where it seems like he's talking about something else, but it's also included in the wordsmithing that goes on in our life, where he says, wealth is worthless in the day of wrath, but righteousness delivers from death. Now, it's interesting. We talked a lot in the past about the issue of wealth, the idea that money sometimes is viewed by Christians as being a negative or a bad thing, and the idea that if we're poor, that makes us spiritual, and if we're wealthy, that makes us rich. And as I've commented in the past, that you can be poor and greedy just as well as you can be rich and greedy, and you can be poor and generous, and you can be rich and generous. The issue isn't what you have or how much of what you have. It's the attitude you have towards the stuff you have. Does it control you, or do you control it? And that's something I really think is really critical, because I never tell people how to manage their resources, their assets. And even our church, I have no idea who gives what, and I don't want to know, because I don't feel like it's any of my business. Yeah, the accounting people have to sort through all of that stuff, but they're not involved in the spiritual lives of the people who are making those decisions. And so I get people ask me questions about their giving, and I tell them what I do if they ask, but the bottom line is that you have to really follow your own conscience. Because as a consequence, my wife and I have often given more than 10%. We've found that whenever we have the ability to minister to other people, we do. But we also only give to things that we prayed about and said, Lord, is this what you want? And my wife and I usually have that conversation. How do you feel about this? Is God touching you here? Is there an amount we're supposed to give? And so many times we found that both of us will look at each other and say, that's exactly what we thought, what I felt, what the amount that I thought we should give to this. And it's just a rich thing, because you know that you're using the resources that God has provided you in the way that he wants you to use them. And it's like a lot of things in life, that when you can be trusted with the little things, he says he'll give you more. And I'm not saying this is a get-rich-quick scheme, as some people imply, but I just find that if I can't be trusted with what God has given me, I can tell you that it's not likely that God's not going to give me much more, even maybe give me less, until I learn to give him complete control and authority over what I have. Ultimately, I was talking to one of my sons who was making a major career shift in his life. He made a career decision, which was very significant, a real step of faith for him. And yet, one of the things that I just encourage him in is I've always found that when I've done that, God has honored that. That you step out in a direction you feel God is leading you, and he catches you, and he has you. It's not even like you drop. It's just like he keeps you going. And you may look out and say, I don't know how I'm sustaining, but God's the wind beneath my wings, and he's carrying me along. And so when we talk about wealth, I think that part of the thing we need to understand is that sometimes we will engage in dishonest conversation, saying and doing things or writing things that are not really completely true, because we desire wealth, because we desire riches. It's when the person's saying this, I'm going to give you my best deal, and you think, that's probably not your best deal. If this was your best deal, why didn't you start there instead of trying to get me to pay more and more and more? I mean, I don't mean to judge somebody who's negotiating, but one of the things I used to always tell people when you go to Israel and they go into the Arab market to bargain, I said, first of all, don't ever give them your credit card. But secondly, I said, if you don't want something, don't bargain for it. Excuse me. But if you do, know what you're willing to pay when you start, and tell them that directly, and then let them see if they can afford to lower the price to that or not, because you don't know what it costs them. Likely it costs them less than what you're even offering, but nonetheless, it's a fair negotiation. You're saying, here's what I'm willing to pay for this, and they're going to tell you what they can afford to give it to you for. And maybe you come to a happy medium. And that's where negotiation is not a problem. That's not a sin. It's not wrong to negotiate. But what it is to try to simply find your sense of worth in beating person down to the lowest price. Later on in Proverbs, Solomon will say, the guy says, I can't afford this, I can't afford this. And he drives the price down, and then he walks away and saying, what a deal I got. Well, that's kind of the way it works, isn't it? Excuse me. But we don't want to be that kind of person. We want to basically say, this is what it's worth to me. This is what I can afford to pay. And it's honest to say, I really can't afford, I can't justify paying more than this and seeing if the person can meet that price. If they said, I can't bring it that low, then you say, well, thank you, and just move on and know that that's not something that God has for you. And if you need that, it's going to come back to you in a different way. But he says in a bigger picture of things, he said, the wealth is worthless in the end because it can't save your soul. It can't lead to the sparing of your life. In some cases, wealth may be the reason why life is lost because some predator has come to take it from you. But he says there is one thing that can save you, and it's righteousness. And that righteousness is really God seeing you in right relationship, and there's a covering and a protection around you that probably won't be there if you're not walking in integrity. And that's why I think that people who trust in their wealth really oftentimes forsake the protective grace that God wants to put around them. But they're over here pursuing wealth and thinking wealth is their strength, and in a way making wealth the God that they worship. And when we fall into that trap, we make ourselves incredibly vulnerable because we don't have the protection of God. I've been in various situations in my life which were life-threatening situations, extremely dangerous. I've had people wave loaded guns in my face before, and it's funny because at the time it was happening, it never concerned me the slightest. I wasn't even scared. It was almost like after the fact, I look back and go, oh my gosh, that's a pretty wild moment. But I just felt this protection of God on me, this watching over, this idea that God was surrounding me and keeping me safe. And I think that's really what we give up when we make wealth our stronghold, when wealth is the thing that we want to acquire, because he said, if I had enough money, then I wouldn't have to struggle. The truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter how much money you have, because when it comes to the basic things of life, you're still going to struggle. You can't buy health. You can't buy happiness. You can't buy friendship. Oh, you can have people who want to hang out with you because you have money, but they're not your friends. They're just there, and when the money's gone, if it's not available or you're not sharing with them, they're going to move on down the road. No, you can't buy those intangibles. Those things come to us as a gift of God. And it's just really, I know a lot of very wealthy people that you wouldn't know are very wealthy because they have learned that it affects their relationships in an unhealthy way. And so as a consequence, they come across very simple, very basic, and yet they know that the friends they have are there because of the relationship they desire to have, not because they want to get something out of that person. And that's becoming harder and harder to find this way because we look at people who are in positions of even power or authority or influence, and we want to get next to them. We want to become associated with them. We want to connect and be their friends because that reflects positively upon us. But that's not what a friendship is based upon. A friendship sees something in someone else that isn't flattering, but they're committed to still loving that person and being in relationship with them. When you find people that discover something they don't like about you and they cut the relationship off, well, they weren't really your friend in the first place, were they? And so this is the thing I think to realize, that there may be a number of different reasons why somebody wants to connect with you, but you have to really be prayerful about, God, is this a person who is wanting to have a sincere relationship with me, or is this a person who simply wants to be, wear me like an emblem on their breastplate so they can show me off and say, I'm close friends with so-and-so. That's a hard thing. And I tell you that any kind of person who's in a kind of a public situation understands this all the time, because there's people who want to, photobomb and love bomb and different ways of bombing your life to get in there just so that they can be in the picture. They can be in the purview of other people. They can be seen in association with you. And what we miss in that is that people are just people. I've never met Donald Trump. And if I ever had the opportunity, I'd say, well, that'd be pleasant, I guess. But I have no need to know Donald Trump. I know I have no need to be invited to the White House so I can sit there and feel awkward as I choke on my overstuffed bow tie. No, because he's just a man just like me. He struggles with issues just like me. And my hope is whenever I get around people who are important, that I can just talk to them like people who aren't. Because in the end, we're all the same. But this idea that if I acquire wealth, it somehow adds this dimension to my life that makes me more wealthy or more significant is one of the biggest lies that Satan sells to people all the time, and it often leads them to great disappointment in life. Well, time's up. We'll continue tomorrow as we look at verse 5 of chapter 11.